recording. Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Noroff podcast. I am Marcus and this is my co-host Trusty. And today we have a guest, or it's the first guest, the guest of the show. Would you want to introduce yourself? What's your name, where are you from, and what do you do?
Hello, I am Diego Saldivar. I am an assistant professor of interactive media at Noroff, and I teach both 3D animation and game design.
All right, all right.
Oh, also, I'm from Mexico City.
Nice. I think you mentioned there that you are like teach 3D modeling and like with interactive media at Noroff. Could you? I think people want to know what you can teach them, like what academics you have studied, maybe start there.
Yes, okay. So let's start with my career and then finish with what signatures or courses I teach at Noroff. So I started with a bachelor's in animation and digital arts from El Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Then I studied a master's degree in game development and research in the Technische Hochschule Köln in its Cologne Game Lab department. And then I was headhunted by Noroff to teach 3D modeling, procedural animation, level design, 3D animation, in fact, and also studio. The skill sets that I teach range from 3D modeling and 3D animation all the way to a little bit of programming, a little bit of level design, some of the theories behind how to do a game that's engaging or an animation that is visually appealing.
Yeah, you mentioned there you studied at like Germany, right?
Yes.
Master degree. So I'm wondering, have you delved into any like topics or any research during your master thesis, or like what have you like been like? Have you specified in anything in particular?
Well, I personally have specialized. Well, in my bachelor's, I specialized in video games, and in my master's, I specialized in neuromodular games. That's to say, games that would use neuromodulation or a way to interact with the brain to change how it works as a game mechanic, specifically using transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is basically using very strong magnetic field near the brain to suscitate twitches or a little bit of phosphenes, right? And some experiments have been conducted to demonstrate how these could be used to communicate with other brains without using the common media such as speech, language, etc. Yeah, like kind of like telepathy, right? And they use games as a proof of concept. So I thought to myself, well, what if this was a commercial thing, not just a scientific experiment? How do we protect our consumers when it comes to their privacy, their health, and their well-being in general? So that's how I specialized there. But I also remember having done some other research during my master's degree when it comes to serious games to kind of encourage people to visit the museum. And I also worked as a VR level designer for the University of Cologne, where we created a VR level to simulate a gambling parlor to see if people with gambling addictions would have the same physiological response to a real gambling parlor versus a virtual one. So
how did that go?
Well, I have not checked with them yet, but I think it went well. The thing is, when I finished the level design for the parlor and then a larger level so that we could see if these physiological reactions endured, then they started actually conducting the experiments, right? So I have not checked if they have already published a paper with the results, but
so you created the environment and then let the scientists do their work,
How long
do
did
their
that
thing.
take?
yeah, basically. Basically, because the scientists knew how to measure the brain, they knew how to measure the body, they knew how to do the paperwork, but they did not know how to do a VR environment. So they
Mm.
hired interns from the school to make that VR environment. So I was part of that team. Um, but beyond that, I did not really stay there. I actually moved to Norway, so I did not figure out what was the results. I think that maybe there's a possibility that yes, gambling addicts might react the same to a virtual environment than a real environment, but that's just my thoughts. I have not yet checked their paper.
Nice. I have one question about like that
Yes.
project in a whole. Like, how long? You mentioned level design. So how long did it take? You recreated what, Cologne, or what did you recreate? Like specific casino in Germany, or?
Well, the instruction was to create a city that looks very German so that it's
Mm,
familiar enough to German
yeah.
participants,
Mm-hmm.
but it cannot be a recreation because then familiarity would kick in and we would get different readings. It was
Mm,
necessary for them to be in an exploratory mode to be able to have the exact same readings across all participants. Because
mm,
if some participants are more familiar with the level than others, they will show different levels of stress, which means that they would have skewed numbers. So in order to make sure that everyone is as unfamiliar as possible, I had to create something new when it comes to the um, how things are located, but it could not be too new, right? So I could not just use an American style city or an Asian style city. It had to be a city that looked kind of like Cologne with the same kinds of architecture, the same kinds of services, the same kinds of
mm,
distribution of whatever it is, right?
mm-hmm.
It was very difficult to be able
Mm,
to create something purely German because
mm-hmm.
we had two people in the team, two game designers in the team, and I had just a few hours per week to be able to work on this. So what I proposed is that we bought assets to be able to populate the level.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a problem because um, it's not very easy to find assets that are perfectly German in its architecture, right? We found some that were kind of Europeanish, and we ran
Yeah.
with that. But the main problem was you cannot find uh, perfectly German or
Mm-hmm.
Colonese style
Yeah.
architecture, right? So we did our
Yeah.
best.
Yeah. If we like take it back, like you mentioned you're from Mexico and you like studied at what school? What was the name of the school?
The university is Tecnológico de Monterrey. It's Monterrey's technological school.
Mm. How if you like, if I may ask, like what was your like passion? Why did you choose like that bachelor degree? Like
Ooh,
what made you like take that step towards development?
that's an interesting question because I actually started studying bachelor's in international affairs
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, first I studied in a French high school in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
I was specializing in economic sciences,
Mm-hmm.
and in there, basically everyone wanted to become a diplomat, right? And
Yeah.
since I already spoke English, Spanish, French, a little German, a little Italian, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
might as well get into diplomacy myself, right?
Yeah.
And then when I entered university, I found out that I love diplomacy from an academic point of view, but maybe not so much from its practice.
Mm-hmm.
I looked around me and I found myself in a room full of very rich, very privileged people who did not really care about the theory of diplomacy, but rather they needed a paper that
The
accredited them
status.
as, yeah, the status. Because all of
Mm-hmm.
them, they all had or wanted to create an NGO, and they wanted to help people in Africa or kids in Africa. That was
Mm-hmm.
kind of the thing. But whenever the teachers talked about political theory or the history of diplomacy throughout time, they just didn't pay attention. They did not really care. So I thought to myself, well, I don't think I would like to work with these people for the rest of my life because they
Yeah.
disrespect the topic, right? So I thought to myself, well, what can I do then, right? Back then I was
So what year was this like?
This was in 2009, 2009, right?
Back back in the
And
day.
back in the day, it's been almost 15 years. Um, Back in that day, I was playing this MMORPG with a real money economy called Entropia Universe. And since I was very young and did not have a way to use a credit card to earn to put my own money into the game, I found creative ways to earn money and have fun in this place. I was news um, photojournalist. I was a photojournalist back then, so I went into all the events, some parties, some interesting things happening. I covered them, took pictures, and I was a photojournalist there. So I thought, why don't I make a career out of my hobby? If I already like video games, if I already like being in them and creating things in a more uh, in a way that goes out of the box. For instance, then I started playing Second Life, and in there you can do whatever. You can model, whatever you can program, whatever you can texture. If you can be creative enough to make it in 3D or 2D, or if you can make an animation or sound, you can upload it to Second Life and shape the environment and the character at your behest. So I think that made me think, hey, maybe I could do this for a very long time as my career. So that's how I started looking around. And this other school, because I was uh, in a school called La Universidad Iberoamericana, the Ibero-American University, right? And right across the street, quote unquote, it was a kilometer away, but Santa Fe in Mexico City is gigantic. So 1 kilometer is across the street, basically. So I went across the street to where a fellow high school friend of mine had gone, because he was already in the Bachelor for Animation and Digital Arts. So I was like, maybe that's not a bad idea. Ironically, I ended up graduating and doing video games, the thing he wanted to do. And he did not graduate in that. I think he graduated in economics and then went to Japan. I do not know if he works in economics in Japan or if he teaches Spanish or something. But the irony is that basically we switched our careers with each other. Because I mean, he's an excellent mathematician, right? And I think that he found out that his skills were better suited elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. So you are clearly a like well educated professor at Noroff, and you like have studied in Germany. You're like really experienced in like life in general, trying out the diplomat's role or like diplomat's education. But what is your like I have like my experience as a student, like being in the class with you. I know you know a lot more than just game development. You like hide behind like I am just a 3D modeler, but you actually have a great knowledge of like history, culture, and like just early like last week you were talking about like diversity, ethnicity, like racism and all that, and like the censorship, markets in the game industry. Like you hide, not you don't hide that, but you have great knowledge. Like, and why? How do you know so much? Basically, like when we're in first year, you teach us like forming context. For listeners, forming context is the first modeling course here in Noroff, and it's fantastic to learn the first tools at Maya Autodesk, which is a modeling software. And Diego is the course leader on that, and he taught me and Marcus how to model. And the course objectives was to model, create a modeling environment where we weren't allowed to use Western culture or Western like rooms. We were supposed to create rooms where, yeah, but
Mm.
it's like you're when somebody asked you about the Mongolian dynasty, the Japan like culture, when I asked you about, um, I did, yeah, assignment about like the Iroquois Native Americans in Canada. When somebody asked you about these questions, you always had a really good and interesting answer. You maybe weren't really knowledgeable about everything, which is really hard, but you always gave the students a really good cultural answer and helped everyone to know where they're supposed to look, you know? Do you have any experience as a historian, do you just love culture? Do you love history? Do you love architecture? Because it's like really clear to me you're a great, like, you have a lot of experience in that field, which is like really uncommon for just a guy that has a bachelor degree and a master degree in game development, right? So what is your take on that?
Well, first of all, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, you're quite correct. It's not everyone has the kind of encyclopedic knowledge that I do when it comes
Yeah.
to history of art.
Hmm.
Um, I think that I'm just a nerd that gets very easily bored. Um, uh, Maybe you have heard of going down the rabbit hole in
Hmm.
Wikipedia. You can also do that with the Encyclopedia Britannica. Um, Sometimes you just read one article and then you go into another article and then another article and just
Hmm.
keep reading, right?
Yeah.
But I think that I have a natural proclivity towards
Yeah.
uh, learning about aesthetics and culture. Back in my
Hmm.
bachelor's degree, I always had the best grade when it came to history of art, maybe
Hmm.
because I'm so interested.
Hmm.
I don't know, my eyes just get so easily
Hmm.
attracted by anything aesthetic, right? And
It
when
is
you're
in
so
your
interested,
interest.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great interest that I get. It's almost like I don't
Like a
know,
hobby. No?
beyond that. I think it's more of an because I
Passion.
mean, it's a passion and a hobby, but I think it's an instinct. I
Mm.
instinctively get drawn to it, and whenever I visit a new city, I always visit a museum or two, right? That's
Mm.
the things that I like visiting when going to new cities,
Mm.
and that allows you to keep collecting a lot of information. But beyond that,
Mm.
even on YouTube, you watch all these videos where they talk about the political development of Venice in Italy and how that pushed for the Renaissance in Italy, not just because of great people who were there, but also because there was so much cultural exchange, for instance, right?
Mm.
Um, so to me, history is kind of like a big gossip. Who did what and when,
Mm.
and why did they do that thing?
But
So
would you say it's like important as game designers and like um, people that are creating games and art in a way? It's like mixture of math and science and art, right? Being a
mhm.
game developer. Would you say it's like important for like new students or like is this degree interactive media? Is it all just about math or just about science, but or is it more multi like challenging degree? Because from my experience, I did not have any know how to code, or I was just a history nerd, and I love psychology, and I just love creating something. I see myself as a creative person, and I love video games. So I when my experience as Noroff is like it ticks all those boxes. Like I need to know
Mhm.
something about business, right? Marketing. I need to know about psychology. I can, if I know something about history or culture, I can know that. I don't need degree in those areas. They just need to be like interested, and that helps me as a game developer. Like, what is the so my question to you about this course, interactive media and specifically games, would you, would you describe this degree? Is it just code for like students that are like newly graduate high school students that are looking for a new degree, would you say this is just code? Should they be scared of applying for this degree, or does this degree teach you many skills? Like, what is your take as a teacher?
Right. Well, the field of game design requires
Mm-hmm.
you to know a little bit about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then you specialize depending on what kind of part of the process you want to really work on, which
Mm-hmm.
is why at Noroff we teach students a little bit of everything. If you don't already know fine arts and programming and history and writing and all of these skills, we teach them here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um, the thing about game design courses like this one is that since you have to learn a little bit about everything, you only get to a certain depth. So you don't really need to know all about mathematical algorithms with discrete mathematics in order to be able to program one enemy hitting, giving you a -5 in health, right?
Yep.
As you remember in level design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think that people should be afraid of saying, I like video games and I want to learn how to make them. But I think that people should still have the motivation beyond, I like playing video games.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you may have noticed, playing video games and making video games are very different things. Because in one, you enjoy a world, in another, you create a world.
Mm-hmm.
From gravity to how the light bounces and everything in between. So if you're going to recreate or create a new world, you need a lot of effort. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't like to make any kind of effort, maybe video game design is not for you. Maybe politics would be more your. I'm joking, of course.
If you don't mind me asking, like what do you expect from a first year? What kind of mindset do you want them to have?
Yes, the kind of mindset I expect them to have is curiosity and motivation, at the very least. If you already have some experience with any kind of arts, with programming, mathematics, that is all right. But if you don't have the motivation, if you don't have the curiosity, if you're afraid, actually, I think that would be detrimental to your learning process. So what I expect, what I hope, actually, because I mean, I have learned not to expect much from life. Now, because if you expect a lot of things, you might become angry because you don't get them instead of looking at the opportunities of what you do have, right? So I always hope to get students with a lot of motivation and dreams and energy, right? But even if I don't, I usually try to help them find those dreams or help them get a little bit more energy so that they can learn all the wonderful things that game design has.
That that like that is really nice to hear, of course, and really interesting answer. I like you're talking from a teacher perspective, and after listening to that answer, that's really I'm wondering what is your like teaching philosophy and ideology when it comes to like what is your goal as a teacher?
So, yeah, what's my teaching philosophies or my teaching goals? Okay, so, ooh,
Where
that's a large
because
question.
Yeah, because like if I can like help you on your way, like from my perspective as a second year student and like have been with you on like many courses, low design, forming context, somewhat ludic studies and so on, Studio 2 as well. Uh, I I feel this great passion from you as a teacher, like trying you like put every like lots of effort of like helping every student going their way. Like the difference between you and maybe other from my previous teachers in like high school, I didn't feel as much passion of like teaching me the right elements. If I have a question, like about level design, I can ask you and you will like try to promote schedule a meeting with you, and you try to have one-on-one conversation to explain it to full depth, not just Google that and like go on your way. So
Right.
it's like clear to me your fundamental like element as a teacher is like you're trying your like very best at like pushing your knowledge onto another student, right?
Yeah, and it's curious that you have only seen half of how I work. Because half of my philosophy is if someone wants to learn, I want them to have the tools to be able to not just understand which button to press, but why it's being pressed.
Yeah.
What is the processes behind that button, and why, if it breaks, how it broke, and why, and how to fix that, right? So
Yeah.
I think that understanding will drive learning, right? That's one half of my philosophy. So you have been the recipient of that half of,
Yeah.
you have a question, let me answer it until it's absolutely clear, so that later on you become a professional that can develop things beyond the basics or beyond the surface level, right? That's one half. The other half I have had to learn when I teach at a university level is to let adults be adults. Sometimes you find that people may not be interested, or they may not have the time, or they may not have the motivation, or sometimes they don't want to listen, right? So they do the things their own way. And I think that people should have this space to learn the hard way as well. So, for instance, and this is something I apply a lot on indie projects, not so much on the classroom, but you have sometimes people with very big egos who say, "Oh, why don't we do it this way?" And you explain it to them, and they still don't get it. So I'm like, okay, let's do it your way. And once it's done, let's check again, right? But I make a point of not just abandoning them to their luck, but rather waiting for them to fail. And once they have failed, coming back in and say, okay, so it failed because of A, B, C, and this is why we implement these best practices, right?
Yeah. You are quite ruthless at the same time. It's like you hide like I remember, here's the story for the listeners. So I remember in Studio 2, which is a course at second year where we are creating a game from our research, basically, from doing an essay, and we are supposed to develop that into a game, right, in really short pitch. And I remember that you were like encouraging everyone to turn up for Studio 2 meetings, right? But at that time, we were just writing and writing and writing this essay and doing like scientific, like debatable, like research about our characters, historical characters or other subjects. And people stopped turning up. And you and Felipe, which is another teacher at Noroff, you like took the talk like after we graded everyone, and you said like your mistakes were you didn't turn up for meetings and you did not ask for help. So we graded everyone, the majority, with not the best grade, and that was really like a wake-up call for some students, I feel like, because like expect that when you hear that from a teacher who take a whole class just explaining how to create like essays and like why the grades are in that particular way. So is that a way of your teaching? You like you don't take bullshit like for, if I may add that.
It's kind of. I mean,
Yeah.
the approach is, if we're talking about bullshit, I let you wallow in it for a while until you're
realize it.
No, until you're sick of the stink. That's when I'm like, okay, you're sick of it. Okay, now will you accept my help?
Yeah.
So, because that's the thing. I mean, as a teacher, every single day I tell students, if you need anything, any help, please ask. But some people don't want to ask. Some people don't believe they need to ask. Some people just prefer not to ask. And this was planned because this has happened in previous years. So what I do is, okay, I'll let you shoot yourselves in the foot in a small way, right? It doesn't affect you as much because, as you remember, the grade is not 50%, it's 30, right? I literally reduced that so that if something went absolutely wrong and, for instance, you get sick with COVID or whatever and you can't work, then your grade doesn't suffer as much. Or if you just don't want to work and you do nothing, you can still pass. Not with an excellent grade, but you can still pass. Right? But I wanted to teach people the lesson of I've always been here. My door has always been open, but if you don't cross the door, how can I help you? Right? So yeah, that wake-up call was planned. It's a little bit ruthless, but I mean the alternative is
sometimes it's needed.
It's needed, and it's part of growing up and maturing to understand that sometimes you're the author of your own problems, right? But yeah, it was planned. I mean, the alternative, quite frankly, is to bother you guys every single day with an email or knocking on your door personally saying, "Hey, would you like to do your homework now?" Right? Which is extreme, I think. It might be a little bit harsh from a large perspective to let you fail so that you learn from your failure. But I think it's a very important part of the process to learn to fail and to have the space, a safe space to fail. That's why I created that space.
And learn to ask for help in general. I feel like you mentioned it actually, or Felipe mentioned that it's like in the Scandinavian like culture not to ask for help, and you guys are like trying your best to like tell the students go up to us and ask the stupidest questions and we'll try to answer it. And you play this game if no one is like participating in the lecture sometimes or feel like sleepy, you like tell everyone to come up with a stupid question too. And I feel like that is a great way to get people to stop being shy of asking the dumb question. Because from my point of view as a student, I learned that here at Noroff to always ask, although because if you don't ask a stupid question, you will be just inside, you will become just stupid because you will never get the answer from that stupid question, right? So that is really interesting game of yours. Come up with the stupidest question to wake everybody up.
It's curious because
it works.
It works, and it's curious because you have two Latinos, Felipe, who's Portuguese, and Diego, who's Mexican, who are accustomed to a French style of debate at all times. In France, because I mean, we both study in French systems. If the teacher doesn't ask if the teacher doesn't hear anyone asking questions, they get very nervous because that means that students were not paying attention or that they did something wrong, right? In a French school, students are always asking questions, trying to push the boundaries, trying to see where the teacher can be tripped intellectually, right? Actually, it's kind of fun to have an entire classroom of students trying to trip a teacher from an intellectual point of view. And then we come to Norway, where we are informed that the Scandinavian profile is a bit more shy, right? So understanding this shyness and understanding this aversion to being wrong, I thought to myself, well, the pedagogical procedure to having someone open up when they are fearful is to create a safe space. So if the fear is, I don't want to say something wrong, then I have to tell you it's okay to say something wrong and it's expected for you to say something wrong, which means that they will say something wrong to something wrong, which is correct. I don't know why. I ask, give me stupid questions, give me stupid answers, and then I get the right ones, which means I think it's more of an emotional barrier that there might be that you think your question is stupid, but you just maybe are afraid of looking like you don't
Bad.
know stuff, or like you're bad, or like you're not paying attention, which is fine. I mean, that's why I always ask me stupid questions, which means let's fill the gaps in your knowledge, right?
I
And I
mean,
mean, I have had like one small complaint about that from your cohort, which was sometimes Diego takes too much time explaining stuff. And I mean, I understand some people might want to just barrel through knowledge, but I have to make sure that everyone understands, especially in the first year, first class you have. I need everyone to understand the basics, and if I am asked to repeat myself 10 times, I will gladly do so in the first year, right?
Yeah.
And I have had a couple complaints because I repeat myself too many times, but it's necessary, right? So
Yeah.
I take that complaint as a compliment.
yeah. I mean, personally, from experience, trying to answer wrong questions or wrong answers, we mostly get some formulation of our own answer into you telling us that it's actually a correct answer.
Well, that too. Because I
Well,
mean,
actually, that is true. It's like, oh damn.
that's actually true. Yeah, no. I do that uh, because I am playing a game, as you say. It's not just creating a safe space, but it also requires a little bit of mental gymnastics from my part to make sure that every stupid question actually sounds smart. Because I'm trying to give you guys a sense of security of, oh, it was not that stupid, right? Or, oh, maybe it was not that far away. So maybe my next question will be kind of like that, where I think it has nothing to do with the subject, but in fact, there's everything to do with it. And yes, it does require a lot of mental gymnastics, but I think so far I've been mostly successful in making students feel less frightened of asking questions, I think, I hope.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like encouragement is the key word for
Mm.
Noroff in general. I feel like every teacher is all about encouraging the students to go on and do their work, because in this field of game development, you need to have is the right word courage, or like you need to be confident on your idea, because either way you would just like crash. So I feel like every teacher is in Nora is trying to encourage you to work on your project, because you'll always get these these thoughts about your project isn't good enough, but actually it is, and that is what the teachers come in and like help you, like you're like just carry on and do your work, and it is will be good. It like that is what I see in Noroff, and the general teaching style at
Mm.
Noroff, which is really cool from my point of view. That helped me personally.
I
And
mean, in regards to that, like me personally, I struggled a lot with doing homework throughout my teen years, and coming into game design, I was really motivated to start like doing stuff and
Mm.
learning something interesting. And but even at the start, I was procrastinating most of the first courses quite a lot. I was trying to pay attention in class and do a few things every day, but it was really until I really felt the stress that I started really pushing myself into doing the assignments. And I have a feeling that most people who play games are really into games to the point where they want to try these courses, end up in maybe the same position. How would you try to fight that mentality, and how would you improve that if you were to be a teacher to the first years?
Well, uh, the it's very difficult. I myself know because I have been that age. I have been gaming for too many hours at night, and um, I don't think that the human brain was meant to do the kind of super formal um, assignments that we have entrusted it to do since the 19th century. And part of it, for instance, is writing a formal project report over something that you're barely starting to learn and understand at an age where your brain is still developing. I mean, the human brain kind of stops being in chaos around age 24-ish. In between, you're still changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your sleep schedule is changing, your the way you work and motivate yourself is changing. Even though you're supposed to be out of high school, you're not out of this um, developmental process. So of course, I personally, that's why I'm sometimes ruthless in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that I let you fail so that your developing brain learns to cope with failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learns from failure. Um, because I mean, I could actively fight against procrastination, but I think that would be a little bit counterproductive given how Noroff teaches. As you said, in Noroff, we encourage students into continuing to grow. In other schools, they may encourage students into avoiding informality or into avoiding um, punishment or
Mm-hmm.
into becoming very punctual or things like that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they can work for different kinds of personalities. But the way we teach at Noroff is incompatible with that kind of um, uh, super aggressive discipline, which I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I myself had to go through. And I think it's fine, but the entire system has to be in line with that philosophy. If you have a teacher who's like, okay, so if you don't do your homework for this weekend, I'm gonna take points off your final grade, right? But he would be the only one in IM doing that, which is going to be taken as an anomaly by students rather than as a rule.
Mm-hmm.
So they will learn to avoid that teacher, not to avoid being late, right? So that's why I give space for students to develop. If you're procrastinating, I let you procrastinate until you fail. And once you have failed, okay, now you failed. I have been telling you every single week, right? In my videos, in my emails, in the syllabus, in everywhere. Please uh, let me see your work so that I can give you feedback. Do you have questions? Please ask the questions. So you didn't ask any questions. This is the result. Now for the next course, I hope that you will be asking questions. I hope that you will be developing things a bit earlier, etc., right? But that's just part of allowing the human brain to develop, right? And since the environment is encouraging, what I can do is to encourage you, but I cannot really fight procrastination the way I've been taught how to fight procrastination, because it's not in line with the philosophy of Noroff. So I have had to come up with new approaches, but personally, I am still trying to find a way to
Yeah.
encourage people on time, right, before they fail, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to work and put the effort at the proper time. And I mean, I do tell my students when I start the course that I discourage crunching.
Mm-hmm.
Halfway through the course, I tell my students, if you're going to crunch, crunch now, not at the end of the course.
Mm-hmm.
Some students will not be able to follow that advice. Some of them do. But those who don't, at some point I have to let them be adults, you know. That's the choice you have made, even though I have made my best to help you or lead you. But yeah, I have to respect your choice as an adult, because when I was teaching high school, I could not respect your choice not to work, right? I had to make certain that you had to work because I was
Mm-hmm.
entrusted with minors, which is a very different responsibility from a legal point of view and an ethical point of view. But once you're in university, even though
Mm-hmm.
basically you're getting high schoolers for the first
Mm-hmm.
year, right? Um, it's you have to introduce them to adulthood,
Yeah.
and part of it is giving them space. And many teachers are have different opinions on this. I know teachers who are like, no, 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 we should be encouraging them every single step of the way, every single day, and if they're not working, we have to check on them. Um, I understand where that comes from, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I no longer do that. I used to do that in high school. In university, I switched gears. It's like
Yeah.
you need to grow up, and I need you to have the space to grow up. If I don't give you that space, how will you grow, right?
So what when did you like you talk about you teach at high school level?
Yes,
So if we like jump some time back, like
yes.
what did you teach in like high school?
I used to teach in a Jewish high school in Mexico. It was an international baccalaureate, or IB.
Yeah.
Sorry,
That's
I
all.
taught computer science. So
Oh,
curious enough, I was teaching basically the same things, but at a simpler level. So
yeah.
from Excel to how to make a small little game, not
Mhm.
with programming, but with there was this node-based
Is that time after in the middle of your master degree and your bachelor
oh yeah.
degree?
When I graduated my bachelor's in 2014, I was looking for a job, and
Mhm.
one of these jobs was teaching computer science in high school. And they were like, yeah, we need you here after you graduate, like immediately after you
Mhm.
graduate. So I graduated in December 2014. I started working in January 2015. And yeah, I was teaching them computer science. I taught them modeling, audio design, video editing, um, graphic design with vectors and Photoshop as well. So yeah, basically kind of a little bit of what you're doing right now,
Mhm.
but for high school. So it was not as complex or nor
Mm.
as deep, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and in that high school, the temperament was completely different. Students just wouldn't shut up. Students were very energetic. You had to work to make them settle down. So you had to come up with all kinds of pedagogical approaches to make them behave properly. And then after that, I studied my master's. Then I'm called to Norway, where I have a completely different
Job title.
uh, temperament. The profile is very, very different, you know.
Mm.
So
Uh,
it was interesting to learn new pedagogical approaches in Noroff.
and how many years have you been teaching, and like why is that? Why are you like a teacher in a sense?
Mm.
Like
Yep,
what is the like your motivation behind that
of
job?
course. Well, I've been teaching 3 years at Noroff. I taught 2 years at that high school level, but beforehand, I had already been teaching.
Mm.
Like many people's summer jobs were working as a waiter or
Mhm.
maybe as a secretary, things like that. My summer jobs were teaching. So I taught English and French when I was um, still learning during my bachelor's.
Like a private
Then during my
teacher.
bachelor's, I had fellow students telling me, hey, can you please help me with this topic? So I literally taught discrete mathematics, programming principles, programming specifics as well, um, because I was good at it. And even when I was because I only studied one semester of international affairs, they're like, how
Mhm.
do you know so much about history? Can you please help us? And I taught them the history of politics during the 20th century, the difference between Marxism, communism, and socialism, and how that developed um,
Mhm.
against the first, the second, and the third world. And why it's called the
Mhm.
third world? It's not because it's third class. It's because they did not want anything to do with either the American um, capitalism or Russian socialism, right? So they
Mhm.
said, we are the third world, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So those kinds of details, I was called to teach. I've always been
Mhm.
called to teach, and I enjoy teaching. That's why I'm a teacher. Because when I graduated from my master's degree, they said, we're going to pay you to teach us how to model, right?
Mhm.
So I did.
Mhm.
I don't know why I'm always called to be a teacher. And since I think it's kind of in my blood, because in my
Mhm.
family, people have an easy time teaching. And in my
Mhm.
case, people request my help as a teacher. So I think that's just the
So
way it has been.
you're natural,
I'm a
therefore.
natural. I'm a
Yeah.
natural.
It's your
And I
destiny.
enjoy teaching. I mean, that eureka moment, when a student's eyes just glow because they understand something and the doors of the world open wide for them. That's glorious to me. I love uh, helping people understand stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just wondering if I like may ask you for my when we are like talking in like class and all that. You mentioned if I remember correctly, you like have studied like opera or singing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a
So
little bit.
it's really clear to me like your work ethic is like phenomenal. All over the place. So you're like been teaching people, you've been like in doing bachelor program teaching high schoolers in opera, you're a history and arts nerd, so you're just everywhere. Is there anything else that you're like hiding from us? Do you like
Ooh, well, I mean, well,
like how many hours a day do you like it's like is it 24 hours or do you get some sleep? You're like everywhere.
back in my day when I was your age and younger, I had much more energy to be
Mm,
doing all kinds of things. And nowadays, I think I get to sleep a little bit more. But
mm-hmm.
here's the thing. I, I I don't know. I'm just very curious about so many things. I like, oh yeah. I mean, I could tell you about the 10 languages I speak, five of them fluently. I could tell you about having learned tea ceremony and kabuki from the geisha district in Second Life. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that the thing I would like to really talk about right now is my interest about neurology.
Yeah, yeah.
The human brain has fascinated me since I can remember. My mom used to show me these kids encyclopedias. My parents bought them for me. I had a
Mm-hmm.
Disney encyclopedia for kids and a Snoopy encyclopedia for kids. But I remember that my favorite was the Snoopy encyclopedia, Tome 1, the part about the human brain. I was just so enthralled by the shape of it, right? And I mean, I have a little bit of a regret not having studied neurology myself, but I knew very early on that I do not have the temperament for medicine. Um, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I have the energy or the emotional uh, stability, so to speak, to be a doctor and work 28 hours per cycle. Those doctors who work 28 hours, I mean it, 28 hours
Mm-hmm.
out of 24.
Yeah.
um, they have so much, I don't know, it's passion for their craft. Even though sometimes you can see doctors objectivizing people because they have to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they very quickly fix many, many problems.
Mm-hmm.
There is a certain temperament you need to be able to not only endure but enjoy that kind of sacrifice. And that's why I did not study medicine and then didn't specialize in neurology. But I'm still so very interested in it, which is why I'm working on neurogame development, um, which is using brain-computer interfaces
Mm-hmm.
to be able to play games. Now, some people have already done this, but it's not very commercial, basically
Mm-hmm.
because the barriers of entry are too high. Either the equipment is too expensive, too difficult to use, the software you need to install just to be able to run a demo
Mm-hmm.
is very clunky and convoluted. So I am working on plug and play Neuro games. Last year, I've been using the Neurosity Crown, where you just have to put your email, your password, and you're in. That's it, right?
Yep.
But this year, I'm going to be working with the Muse 2 from Interaxon. I have a colleague in Canada who has a bit of a plug and play example, which I want to use to be able to create a template so that any student could, or anyone who's interested in game design,
Mm-hmm.
could start making neuro games without knowing anything about neurology. So that's my goal this time. So that's another thing that it's not that I hide it, but I mean, I feel like I'm a bit like a dice. I have so many faces creating one single whole, and it.
It's it's so interesting. It's so interesting being with you in class from my like I think all students like are asking like lots of questions in their head like when we are with you in class you like like uh, from my experience in the when I was at former contest in the first year, like when you talked a little bit German, I was like, because I studied German in like high school,
Mm.
and I know the accent really well and like know some words, and you like you talk sometimes German in your class. Sometimes you pronounce the like French words really well, and like you, it's like really interesting to me, like how much you know, but you don't like you just show glimpses of it, like, and you like
Yeah.
mentioned like time at a time, like, oh yeah, I'm creating a neuro game, and it's about you can control things with your head. And anyway, we can like start talking about modeling, and everyone in the class is like, hold up, so you have been like speaking German, French, you mentioned opera, and you are creating neuro games. What can't you do, you know?
Lose weight, apparently. I was almost able to, but things happened. Anyway.
Blame it on
Yeah.
COVID.
You know, maybe that's why I have to hide some stuff, because otherwise I would be too distracting. Because we have to concentrate on modeling, right? Because
Yeah.
if I could spend the entire week talking about opera and singing
Yeah.
opera to students, but the point is you have to learn how to model and topology and what is the difference between a vertex and edge and a
Yeah.
face. Yeah, I have to kind of tone it down for the sake of education.
So, I have like two questions
Yeah.
for, and it's more about like advice and like what you teach. So, first off, I could you remind us like what you teach here in Noroff, just to like,
Yes, of course.
and yeah,
The courses I teach are basically 3D modeling for my
yeah,
context. I teach animation in 3D. I
mm-hmm,
teach procedural animation, motion capture, particles. What else do we teach in motion capture? Inverse kinematics in game engine, and shaders, of course.
mm-hmm,
And also level design in 3D for Unity.
yeah, and then studio, of course.
Oh, and the studio course, which is um, basically professional development from conceptualization to implementation of
Hmm.
games and animation.
What courses would one expect in year 1, year 2, year 3?
Yes. Well, it depends on if you're an animation student or a game student. I would imagine that you are catering to game students right now. So for
Mm-hmm.
game students, after you learn 3D modeling, well, no, PBL.
Yeah.
PBL, also known as problem-based learning, is a first way of introducing students to proper formal writing, uh, because you use that in university all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have form and context, um, along with studio. Studios are basically year-long. So in studio, if I remember correctly, Eric teaches a few tools of the trade along with,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, along with, let's see, character design, if I remember
Mm-hmm.
correctly,
Yeah,
right?
Curtis
While
design.
at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
in form and context, you learn how to model in 3 dimensions
Mm-hmm.
from the first cube to, in this case, an entire environment, right?
Yep.
Since it's not just the form, but also the context, you also are taught, well, part of your education is to research
Mm-hmm.
your form, right? And what I usually do to encourage students to go outside of their zone of comfort is
Mm-hmm.
to research things that are either not Western or not modern.
Yeah.
In this case, I'm trying to make it less modern because I was given a few comments about, oh, but there's so many interesting things that are not Dungeons and Dragons, right? So, for instance, Greece, ancient Greece, um, it would be very interesting from a foreign point of view, but if since it's Western, you basically canceled all of Greece, right? So I reintroduced Western, but it has to be very old, like older than 18th century, to make sure that students don't draw on things that are familiar, but explore unfamiliar territory, right? Now, that's for my context. After that, if I remember correctly, because I do not know everything by heart, you have
Narrative, the writing course with Alexander, right?
yes, narrative, which is supposed to introduce you to how to create a proper storyline. Now that you have done kind of a little bit of both, and that is complemented by game assets, if I remember correctly, where you are exploring the 3D modeling in a deeper manner, wherein you get more tools for the proper modeling of an asset for video games, which is much more different than assets for film, which are a little bit more permissive. Assets for games have to be very, very efficientized, because if it's not super efficient, something will break, especially when you have a lot of assets. So that's narrative and assets, kind of like ludology and narratology. And then what do you have? I don't think it's level design yet, right?
Gameplay?
Yeah.
Gameplay before
Gameplay.
Christmas.
Ah, yes. Gameplay. That I have not really heard from gameplay myself.
Gameplay is basically a course where you are setting a group where you need to create your own board game and create and understand how system works, game loops works, game mechanics, how to balance a game from a board game level.
Ah, right.
And you understand how like play and creating a game, which is our like goal, right? And you understand the connections between playing a board game, playing any game in general, creating game out of nothing, and essentially from that course. And you are supposed to work together as a group to create your own board game. Yeah,
Yeah, I
so
remember now,
really
because
interesting.
that's the time in the year when Joshua gets out all of the board games, and
Yeah,
you guys have to play a lot to understand and analyze the mechanics before you can do
yeah.
your own. Now I remember, yes. And then
hmm
after all of that, you have level design with me, where I use a ready-made system so that you don't have to create
Yeah.
assets or parts of the level. So you can just use assets that are already made to be able to implement game design principles in a spatial manner, right? That's why I usually go for 3D spatial design. Some students have requested 2D, but I think that 3D is um, it's important to think of 3D, because you can translate many of those principles to 2D, not all of them, of course, but you cannot translate all of the 2D principles into 3D, right? So that's why I always keep 3D
Yeah.
as part of the assignment.
hmm
So yeah, that's level design. So that's the first year for game students, right? Animation students, on the other hand, yeah, they also have a little bit of narrative. You have it with them,
Yeah.
studio as well. What is not shared, however, is rigging and animation, which is basically once you have done your character design, you have to rig it so that it can be moved, right? And that also introduces a lot of um, workflow steps when it comes to mm, materials design, kind of, if not materials, textures, right?
hmm
And then animation. Okay, now that you have your rig, well, move it, right? So that's basically the difference between games and animation. Animation specializes in bipedal characters in the first year, how to prepare them to move and how to move them.
hmm
Because moving, the illusion of life, as the book calls it, is more of an observation of reality and then synthesization and stylization of reality into animation. And that requires very deep study,
hmm
which then we retake in the following years.
I was wondering, after like talking about all these courses and for first year students, what advice would you like give them? Could you explain what it takes to create a game and how much time it takes?
Ooh, well, it can take anything from 5 hours to 5 years, a proper game, right? I myself did a game in 5 hours as part of my homework out of desperation. Because here's the thing, the teacher said, okay, we need a game with only 5 colors, no gradients, only 5 colors, one button. You have 1 week to do that. Make groups. Okay, so I had a group with this guy who was a little bit flaky, and came Sunday. I was like, he has not really talked to me. I will just send him the assets he said he wanted and make my own game by myself, because back then I was on a scholarship and I could not afford to have my grades lowered by anyone. So whenever there was anyone who may have endangered my grades, I ditched them and did my own thing, which is why I had to make a game in 5 hours. And it was actually good because I was pushed into going for the minimum viable product, right? So I modeled, yeah, there's a point for the minimum viable product, and then you build on top of that, which is literally what I did. After I presented it, someone said, "What if you add this one thing, right?" And then I spent 1 more hour adding that thing, so 6 hours total, right? What was it? It's a luchador dash. Basically, you have to tap on the screen to be able to kind of hit another fighter, and if you which makes a bar move. So once you move the bar to the other side, you knock them out. Otherwise, they knock you out, right? So it was quick and easy. I got top marks for that. 5 hours, 6 hours, right? It doesn't have a scoreboard. It doesn't have. I know. It doesn't have much. It's very naked, but it still works, I think.
Yeah.
So, but you know that the best games are made with teams of hundreds of people for years and years. So, if you're a student, I would recommend that you try making games in first minutes, then hours, then days, right? How so? Try to look at games that you already play, paper, scissors, rock, or maybe you play Sudoku, right? So try modifying one thing, right? Try to see if it works. That should take minutes. Then, once you understand how to use Unity, for instance, or Unreal, try to see if you can make one quick game in a game jam style session with yourself, just to play with the tools, right? Then attend game jams. And I think that students should be iterating on many kinds of game tries and failures every so often, right? So I know that we give you guys maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks, right, to make a game sometimes. Sometimes we give you an entire semester. But I think it's good practice for you to play at making games, right? Whether that takes 2 hours, a weekend, that would be my recommendation, to hone your skills by actually using them. And at some point, I know it's nerve-wracking. My first game jam was something very anxiety-driven, because my first game jam required me to move from Germany to France. I went to Angoulême, and I was in an unknown place. I did not know where I would be sleeping. I did not know if I was safe at all. But I just went into this game jam. It was a how do you call it? An exchange, right? So French students went to Germany. The students in Germany went to France, because none of us were German. It was an American, an Egyptian, and a Mexican enter a bar. I mean, enter Angoulême. And we were students in Germany, right? So that was my first game jam. It was quite a shock to move countries just to make games for a weekend with complete strangers. But I mean, most game jams nowadays are online completely, so make the most out of that. If you can make a physical game jam, go for it. It's quite interesting to see in real time what the needs of others are, because as you're making your own games for yourself at home, you know what you want, you know what your vision is. But once you open the door and look at how others work, you start learning how to communicate your ideas. You start learning how certain processes may be better or worse for a certain goal, but you can only get to that when somebody else challenges you. When you're all alone, you're challenging yourself, and you might give yourself great challenges, but unknown challenges make you grow faster, I think. So that would be my recommendation for all students in first year. Make a lot of effort, fail a lot, fail often, fail
And
smart.
how about like what do you think it takes to like enter the industry? Of course, we are in this degree to like learn to make games, and you can go in like you're not when I say the industry, I'm not only talking about entering the AAA industry, of course. You can become a teacher like Diego, and like you can try to be a freelancer or like indie developer. You can try to enter the AAA market or like be an intern, or there are many ways that you can use this degree. What is your like advice or like your take on what next? Of course, like when I graduate, I'm second year student. I will graduate next year, hopefully. And what next? Like, what is like for what's to come?
Can you predict
Indeed.
our future?
Yeah.
Indeed, yes. It's curious because that was the first class I gave at Noroff. It was my test class. So they were like, we're going to fly you to Norway so that you can teach a class on what kinds of career paths there are after graduation. So yeah, you have already mentioned some of them, but let's start with the weird ones first and then the classical ones. Okay, so you can be a speaker, for instance, in conferences. If you specialize in a very specific topic on the theory or the practice of game design, you should be, for starters, looking at the call for papers or call for speakers in many conferences around the world, such as GDC, DevCon, CDEC, PAX, etc., right? Because they usually ask for speakers months in advance, and once they close their call for speakers, they're closed until the next year, right? So try to send some of these. Try to send an application to some of these. Most likely, if you have not had any publications before, if you're a nobody, sometimes they will say why, right? But there's other smaller conferences which always accept speakers of any kind, and sometimes they have these speaker slots just for young new speakers, right? People who have not yet published 30 things, people who do not have a doctorate. Because part of this sometimes is studying a master's degree, then a doctorate degree, and part of the doctorate degree is very different from the master's and bachelor's. Master's and bachelor's is develop your skills. The PhD is develop your research. And the research requires you to document things in a much more specific manner than you would have in bachelor's and master's, right? And part of the culture of the PhD is to publish and publish and publish in journals and magazines and publications where you showcase that you're not only researching, but you're producing research results, which is you gather information, it's kind of like the project report. No, it's like PBL kind of. You gather information, and then you develop that information, and then you add to that idea, right? So it's kind of like the paper, the very paper I showed you guys in Ludic Studies for ludonarrative harmonies.
Yeah. Are you trying to become a public speaker with that?
I have already given some public speeches before. In Clash of Realities in my own school. The Clash of Realities is the name of the conference, right? I have been invited sometimes here and there to talk about gender representation in games. Well, kind of like queer representation in games, in fact.
Yeah.
That was back then. Nowadays, I'm going for newer games. So yeah, I have already set because I missed the deadline for GTC this year by a week. I do not know why they moved it, but I was not able to make the deadline this year. But I have already sent my newer games talk application for CDEC Japan, for DevCom in Germany, and as soon as GDC opens it up, I think I will be trying my luck, trying to say, hey, guys, neuro games exist. Take them seriously.
So neuro games and ludic harmonies are your two topics you would like to discuss at these conferences.
Yeah, I mean, ludic harmonies was a thing that was born out of curiosity. Here's the thing. When I arrived to Noroff, they said, okay, we need to publish
One
things.
of those
Would you like to
rabbit
publish?
holes.
Yeah, basically, they're like, would you like to publish something? I'm like, yeah, but what? I'm not sure. So I came across this ludonarrative dissonance concept, and I was like, but what if instead of cognitive dissonance, we're talking about musical dissonance? And that's my rabbit hole there. But yeah, right now, actually, I'm writing a paper on how to diminish VR sickness in digital twins, right? I'm writing that along with Dr. Eric Geslin for you. And that's another thing I'm doing. So,
which is a teacher at Noroff.
Yes, Dr. Eric Geslin, French guy. Remember him from Ludic Studies?
Yeah.
There you go. So we're publishing together as well. But that's the thing. I mean, when you're a speaker or an academic, academics do speeches, but not all speakers are academic, you know?
Yeah.
They may have an interesting thing to say, and they may say it in TED Talks, they may say it in conferences. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do if you want to go into academia is writing books, right? Writing manuals, teaching as well. Because there's an art and a science to teaching, and if you're natural at teaching, you can do what I do, teach, or you can make tutorials online. You can even earn money by doing that in learning platforms. So that's one thing you can also do. Another thing you can do is, for instance, get into publishing and marketing. So understanding how video games are made and how the franchises are made, you can get into the business of it, which is where do you get the money? How do you spend the money? Where do you get the human resources, the timing? What kinds of IPs, intellectual properties, do you have to license, and how you can use them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? From selling figurines to making games about franchises. That's one thing you can do. You can get into production.
Yeah.
Not so much development. Development is let's make the game. Production is how do we manage making the game, right? That's another thing you can do. Let me think.
There's one thing interesting that Paul, which is another teacher that we will interview hopefully at Noroff, he mentioned that as game designers and game developers, and technology is moving so fast, we can actually apply for jobs or research to be like a freelancer for like medical institutions and law institutions, and help with creating 3D environments for these areas. That is really interesting to me personally, like helping that part of the world or work world with game development. I did not know that was possible to be a freelancer for that part. And
you can even work full time, but the jobs are very scarce in that regard. Full-time jobs, at least.
Yeah.
Back in my days, it was called serious gaming. Nowadays, you call those, for instance, edutainment, where you can create VR simulations for pilots, for doctors, for rig workers, electricians, etc., so that they learn skills without getting into risky situations. That's one thing, for instance. Law, you can also use that, for instance, right here in forensics, well, digital forensics, sorry. They have some students have worked with digital forensics to be able to reconstruct in 3 dimensions crime scene, for instance, right? Which is in line with what you saw in form and context, but much more realistic, right? Less artistic, more realistic.
Yeah.
And that can also be made, yes, of course. You could also create virtual experiences for museums. You can try to recreate destroyed landmarks. For instance, you know how the Cathedral of Notre Dame got burnt. So you had like an army of 3D modelers trying to reconstruct that in 3D to be able to plan its reconstruction, but also to be able to understand how the fire went, right? How was it originated? Why did it spread the way it did? And also you saw some very similar things happening with Beirut's explosion, where they took the footage from many cameras which were recording at the time, before and during and after the explosion, to be able to make a reconstruction of how things went and why they happened that manner. Yes, so you can also use your game design skills from 3D modeling to the actual Unity development to be able to get into lines of work that did not exist before. You know?
Like for example, like we mentioned, architecture, medicine, law, museums, and all sorts of things. I feel like, and that like when I started, I thought only about indie development or AAA industry. I thought you were only locked into those areas of work, but with technology and the world moving onwards, it's like really apparent to me that this degree is really open-ended, like limited amount of like work experience you can gain from it, which is a concern for some people that don't believe in maybe getting like new students like don't know if they will be stranded after some degrees, and that is a problem today for some students. But I think this degree really shows that you can, if you are creative, you can find a place to work, place you can like show your experience.
Yeah, and I think it's also about your interests.
Yeah.
If you're interested in first person shooters, go ahead.
Yeah.
There's a market for that. If you're interested in dentistry, you'll find someone who needs VR levels to teach dentistry students how to anesthetize a patient, for instance. Things like that. But yeah, like there's unsuspecting areas where you can develop your skills. They might be not very easy to find because they're new. Only a very specific niche requires them right now. But as technology continues developing, and as, for instance, VR becomes cheaper, more people will be in the market for a specific VR experience. Or as mobile games become much more powerful, there will be a bit more need for certain kinds of specialists, right? So there's so many things you can do, and if you don't find it, do what I do, just make it yourself. Like neurogames as a market does not exist yet. So I'm doing my best to open it.
And how about the general industry? How
the
would
more
you
classicals?
more classical? How would you recommend new students or students that are graduating to is the grades that we are looking out for? Is the portfolio, like how for us, like how can we work at Ubisoft or work on a new AAA game or work at an indie studio? Like what are the patterns and the routes on that way?
Yes, indeed. Your grades are only very important if you're going to continue to a master's degree and then a doctorate degree. They always ask for grades because the school will ask for school stuff.
Yeah.
Your portfolio is also very important because the school needs to know at a master's level, can you fit with the game design students, right?
Yeah.
Instead of having to learn from zero. If you have to learn from zero, go learn a bachelor's degree in game design before you go to a master's, right? So those are very important if you want to continue your education in academia.
Yeah.
For the industry, let's start first with in the industry. Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to independent work, I recommend that you learn one more thing that you might not necessarily be taught in every school, which is business. You need to know a little bit of intellectual property, a little bit of contract work, a little bit of how to declare taxes as an independent studio, how
Yeah.
to ask for grants from the government or from companies to be able to develop your own games. That takes a little bit of a while because you need to know what a business model is or what a return of investment is. You need to learn how to fill out a lot of paperwork since you will be alone basically in
So
doing
learn
what you do.
financial literacy basically and
A little bit of
marketing and all that.
financial literacy, a little bit of bureaucratic literacy, especially and law,
Yeah.
specifically about intellectual property, how it's distributed in a team of people instead of just one person. And these kinds of things are very, very important if you want to start all by yourself. There's many courses online when it comes to, for instance, paying taxes. Your government most likely has a video or two of how to pay taxes or how to declare yourself as an independent studio.
Yeah.
When it comes to asking for grants, that might be a little bit more difficult, and you need to be very personable with the people in the offices that offer these grants. So ask for an appointment. Tell them, you know what, we're a new studio. We are pre-seed. That's now the name for it. That's to say we are not even starting yet, but we want to starting. Sorry.
Yeah.
And we need consultancy. So can you help us with how to fill these forms? So we have this idea. How do we translate that into bureaucraties in these forms, right?
Yeah.
That's one part. That part will serve you forever. There's another thing that you have to know when it comes to indie development is that there's many enthusiasts, but not everyone knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I recommend that you find a team that you trust. And sometimes it's kind of difficult to say, oh, yeah, I wanted to make a game with you. And then you find out that they have no idea. You're the only one who actually has a bachelor's in game design. You're the only one who knows how to use Unity and Unreal, right? It might break your heart and theirs to say, hey, you know what? I'm no longer interested. I love the idea of it. Bye-bye, right? That's why you have to attend so many game jams to get to know the people that you trust, to get to know the people that you know will complement your skills.
Yeah.
Because in being indie and alone, I can tell you as someone who does it, can be very frustratingly slow, right?
Yeah.
Because everything falls on you. But if you have a team of people who you know can be trusted to do X, Y, or Z, then you have a much faster development process.
And that is also very important for being a student at Noroff to get to know the other students in these works. And maybe there is one or two team members that you can join up with after the bachelor degree. What I'm like planning on, and I have, I'm preparing to talk to some students to help me create a game after bachelor degree if we don't get any internship. So that is also another opportunity that you get when you're at Noroff, I presume.
Yes, indeed. That's why we have studios.
Yeah.
To bring people together. And sometimes you'll find that some of your fellow classmates might not work very well. Some of them are stars who you don't feel uh, that you can really approach because they're so far above you. But in the end, that's the entire point of the studio work, is to help you learn the profiles of your fellow students, to find a work group that in the end is going to benefit you beyond your bachelor degree, right? So yeah, I
And
recommend that you start doing that right now.
and
Yeah.
and the last part, like before we end, because we are out of time, like the
Oh, I
last
know, but I
thing
have
is,
to talk about the AAA
yeah, I was
industries.
going to ask about that. Can you finish up on that?
Yes, of course. Now, the way to enter the AAA industry has changed.
Okay.
Um, because of how the industry has grown, because of COVID and because of history and because etc., it has become a bit too easy for recruiters to get 1,000 CVs, which they can ignore. So the way into the AAA industry is to physically be there, either with an internship where you're physically there right beside
Mm-hmm.
your colleagues, and they get to know you as a person, and then they can tell you, hey, we want to continue working with you afterwards, right? Let's give you a contract after you graduate.
Yeah.
Or go to conferences, say hello to people, right? Sometimes you can tell them, hey, you know what? I'm going out for lunch in 1 hour. Do you have time? Let's go for lunch, right? Talk to people, get to know them. Once they know your face, once they know your name, even if they don't know your portfolio, even if they don't know what grades you have, they will
Mm-hmm.
remember you as a person,
Mm-hmm.
which is easier to remember. It's easier to remember a person you have met rather than 1,000 CVs that you have ignored, right?
Yeah.
So yes, your CV has to be on point, and make a CV and a resume with an
Mm-hmm.
exhaustive list of all your skills and how many
Mm-hmm.
years you've been using them. A CV which is easy to read, but also if it's easy to read, it's easy to ignore, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have a portfolio. Yes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of portfolio depends on what you want to work on. The AAA industry prefers specialists in general.
Yeah.
So try to see, okay, what do I want to specialize in? Do I want to specialize on creating shoes for characters, right? Do I want to specialize in hair? Do I want to specialize in combat mechanics when it comes to shooters, first-person
Mm-hmm.
shooters? Okay, so create a portfolio that showcases that. If it's programming, get a GitHub. If it's animation, YouTube and ArtStation are going to be your friends. Vimeo, especially when it comes to high definition.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you want to get into esports, well, you have to find what is the need they have, and how have others filled it, so that I demonstrate the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
So that it's easier for someone who's like, okay, I want to hire you, but I have to demonstrate that you are hireable, right? That's how you demonstrate it. But the era of getting a great portfolio and then getting automatic jobs is gone. You might get freelance propositions with an excellent
Mm-hmm.
portfolio, but you have to pedal it. You have to move it around.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a game demo, you can showcase it in conferences. But yeah, my recommendation for AAA is go get them, like physically. Go to GDC, go to DEF CON, Gamescom, and start making
Be annoying.
connections. Be
Be
annoying,
annoying.
a little bit, a little bit. I mean, try to be pleasant rather than annoying,
Yeah.
but be there. If you're
Yeah.
not there, you can be ignored because there's so
Mm-hmm.
many people online trying to get their attention. And I know because I've been there myself, right?
Yeah.
They don't care about 1,000 CVs. They will tell, oh, you don't have the skills we're looking for, and then ask again later on for a person with your skills. They don't have the time to look at your portfolio, at your CV. They only have time for their friends. They have time for people they've met. So go ahead and do that. Of
Yeah.
course, there's exceptions. You may see some people who just get online and get the job. Perfect.
Yeah.
In my experience, that is not quite what happens. again, because of digital tools, it's easy to ignore a list of names, but it's very difficult to ignore a friendly face in a conference.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So
Thank you for
Thanks.
your questions your answers to our questions.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure having you here and talking to you, Trausti, as well. Thank you for basically asking all the questions for me. And that concludes our first episode of the Noroff podcast. There'll be more.
Hope you guys enjoyed. Yeah, there will be one. Next one up is Felipe, which is another professor here at Noroff, and we'll be asking him a lot of questions about everything related to interactive media and more. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Remember to like and subscribe.
Yeah,
Subscribe and,
don't forget that.
follow Noroff. Try to get in.
Whatever platform you're listening this on, just follow them. I think you can expect so many interesting things from these two guys.
All right. Well, thank you, and ciao.
Goodbye.
And cut.